Was there a conflict of interest in the Steven Avery murder case? Today on the Jim Hagerty Show. Welcome back, everybody. We're still discussing the Steven Avery murder case. Now that Convicting a Murderer, the 10-part rebuttal to Making a Murderer, is 5 episodes in. Of course, Making a Murderer is the 2015 Netflix series that chronicled both Steven Avery cases, the 1985 wrongful conviction and the 2005 death of Teresa Halbach, for which Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey, his nephew, are serving life sentences, Avery without parole. Now, I reported on this case as Making a Murderer made its way, if you will, across the internet beginning in late 2015 and beyond. I dug through case files. I talked to key players in the case leading up to the release of Convicting a Murderer, in which my investigative notes are sprinkled throughout the series. Now, one of the most compelling parts of this case is the belief that Manitowoc County deputies and any county personnel, rather, were not supposed to be investigating the Halbach case. And that's been a key element in the belief that Steven Avery was framed. Of course, now 8 years later, that's still a heated debate whether they were even supposed to be there. And it increased the moment that Making a Murderer revealed that it was two Manitowoc County officers, Langton Colburn, who found the key to the RAV4, Teresa's car, in Steven Avery's bedroom. So let's jump right in. Now, it's widely known that Steven Avery was suing Manitowoc County at the time of Halbach's murder, and that was over the time he spent in prison, the nearly 20 years he spent in prison. He spent a total of 18 years in prison. Some of that was because of the incident where he ran his cousin off the road at gunpoint. And the majority of it was for a 1985 rape that he did not commit. It was a sexual assault and an attack on businesswoman Penny Bernston. Now, he didn't commit the crime. And that case is chronicled in the first episode of Making a Murderer. Now, according to the lawsuit that he filed, he was not only wrongfully convicted, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department failed to pass along a phone message about the real rapist. Of course, we know that to be Gregory Allen. And that bungling of that phone call ultimately cost Avery another 8 years in prison, according to the lawsuit. Now, not long after his release, about a year after his 2003 release, he filed that $36 million suit. And with that pending, during the Halbach investigation, Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Pagel announced that Manitowoc County would only play a support role in the murder investigation, which we all know that within 48 hours, it began being isolated to the Steven Avery salvage yard. So, but other than providing the tools, Manitowoc County was not to play a lead investigative role. Calumet deputies were even assigned to shadow Manitowoc County deputies while they were on the property. They were not to be left alone. Now, as far as the public knew, all of that changed when Manitowoc County Lieutenant James Lank found Teresa Halbach's car key in Avery's bedroom, and another deputy found her bones in the burn pit behind his garage. Now, it was clear that while this was Calumet County's case, the trenches were full of Manitowoc County personnel. And as it turned out, they did have an investigative role from the onset. But was that a conflict? Well, let's go back to Andy Colburn. Colburn, of course, is the one who took the call. Convicting a Murderer, episode 5, does touch on that phone call that Andy Colburn took in 1995. He was working in the jail as a jailer, as a corrections officer. He took the call and he did pass it along. It didn't go anywhere. And of course, Avery did remain in prison. But that is in Convicting a Murderer, episode 5. But where did Colburn come from? Did he come out of nowhere, like the fans of Making a Murderer claim after years of looking at case files? Now, millions of people, folks, have looked into this case. The case files are now all over the internet because of a crowdsourcing effort, and millions of sleuths out there believe that they've uncovered they uncovered facts, if you will, that Andy Colburn was part of a conspiracy to frame Steven Avery. Of course, Andy Colburn and Convicting a Murderer, and those on that side of the argument say that's not the case. But Colburn was part of this investigation from the onset. He was sent to the Avery property by Calumet County investigator Mark Wiegert only hours after Teresa Halbach was reported missing by her mother on November 3rd, 2005. And he remained close to the investigation. And he remained close to the investigation, and this is not clear in Making a Murderer, but I actually stumbled upon this when I was digging through the case files early on in 2016, and it was explained to me that Andy Colburn was part of this investigation early on, and he was part of the investigation along with James Lenk and others from Manitowoc County, by the way. Now, Lenk and Colburn are kind of roped in as these villains in Making a Murderer because they found the key. They were there when the key was found. And, of course, they tied that in with this announcement that Manitowoc County would not lead the investigation. They'd only be playing the support role. But what was uncovered in some of the reporting that I did and in Convicting a Murderer, that Lenk and Colburn were involved in this investigation, the way they were involved in this, and they were sent to Avery's bedroom the day that the key was found, is because they were at the time certified evidence technicians, meaning they were trained to process crime scenes, to uncover evidence and process evidence when other deputies in that rather small department were not evidence technicians. I believe there were 2 or 3 evidence technicians in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department at the time, 2 of whom were Lenk and Colburn, which is why they were involved in the way they were involved. Now, of course, we know that Colburn is the one who overturned a certain area that contained a bookcase in Avery's bedroom moments before Lenk found the Toyota's key. Of course, the state claimed at trial that the key popped out from behind the bookcase when Colburn was shoving things back into it. And of course, the defense still claims, even Kathleen Zellner claims today, she's of course Steven Avery's new attorney, been on the case since 2016, I believe, claims that Lenk, Colburn, and other officers who were on the scene that day planted the key there. So with the car, the key, and the bones found on Avery property, Manitowoc County's involvement not only continued, it increased. But was there a conflict? Was there truly a conflict? Was there a legal authority that Manitowoc and Calumet officials ignored by allowing Colburn, Lenk, and Manitowoc County to work this case? Now, we do know that defense attorneys cannot legally represent clients with whom they have a conflict. Judges must recuse themselves from conflicting cases, and juries, of course, must be unbiased. Prosecutors are also bound by such rules. Police, however, are not. Now, in the Halbach investigation, now it was marked. There was an announcement. Okay, and Jerry Pagel was not the only one who publicly announced this. Manitowoc County District Attorney Mark Rohr announced that Manitowoc would not lead the investigation, and he is the one who wanted to have other officers shadowing Manitowoc County deputies on the Avery property. Now, he did not, however, because he cannot legally bar them from the case. So what does this mean? Well, according to law, it means that when police have a conflict, like the perceived conflict in the Avery case, even when there is a conflict, evidence they collect is fair game. Now, they can collect evidence. Now, what about judges? Now, judges do play a part when it comes to evidence collected by officers and conflicts of interest, although it's not the stringent rule most people believe it should be. And that continues to perplex Making a Murderer viewers, and it was quite confusing while reporting on this case after Making a Murderer was released. Because millions wondered why the bones, the key, the car, and the blood was admitted to evidence at all. And of course, we had the argument at trial where some of the trace evidence in the case was accused of being contaminated. That was also admitted. But most evidence in a criminal case, if it's relevant, makes it to the jury if it has a tendency of proving facts. We do know that. To Avery's supporters, who collected the evidence is tantamount to the findings themselves. To his lawyer, Kathleen Zellner, not only did Manitowoc County law enforcement appear suspicious by finding the key, for example, they planted it, she claimed, in her appellate briefs. The bones seemed to follow a rapid succession of evidence on Avery's property that began as soon as he left town for the weekend, according to the defense. And while there is no authority that could have kept Manitowoc County deputies out of the Avery investigation, it is a common belief that where his case stands today is an outcropping of Manitowoc County's involvement. So that means, to some, had Manitowoc County stayed out as Pagel seemed to have promised, this perceived conflict and possibly making a murderer at all would never have existed. It would just been another murder case. Now, to Kathleen Zellner, it's not that simple. Steven Avery, of course, continues to claim that certain officers were part of the probe for one reason, and that was to help stage a crime scene. What do you think? Convicting a Murderer is out on Daily Wire Plus. It claims to rebut Making a Murderer, which is a Netflix production. It is still out, both seasons. The first season chronicles the Teresa Halbach investigation and the 1985 case. The second season of Making a Murderer highlights Kathleen Zellner's bid to free Avery based on the theory that evidence was planted and that Steven Avery was targeted and framed because of his lawsuit, which of course is dealt with in detail in Convicting a Murderer. And speaking of the head-to-head duel that's going on right now between Convicting a Murderer and Making a Murderer on Rotten Tomatoes, Convicting a Murderer is back up to 73%. That is the audience score. On Rotten Tomatoes, of course, Making a Murderer is hovering right around the 97% mark. The average tomato meter shows the Making a Murderer docuseries at an 84% score. Of course, Making a Murderer has been out for nearly 8 years, but Convicting a Murderer has had a bit of a tough go at it, especially after a tweet came out from an Avery supporter. There are several admins to different Facebook groups and Twitter feeds and Reddit subreddits that Steven Avery allegedly made a call from behind bars for his supporters to jump on the Rotten Tomatoes site and tank the score. As we know, after the first 2 episodes were released, or 3 episodes rather, of Convicting a Murderer, Rotten Tomatoes score showed right around a 94% score. And then after the tweet that was allegedly directed by Steven Avery from behind bars, the rating for Convicting tanked a little bit into the 60s, and now it's backed up to 73%. Not that it makes any difference. You decide, folks, whether you believe the Making a Murderer saga and whether that brings you to a belief that Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey were framed, or you believe that Convicting a Murderer filled in the blanks. We will discuss that another time. Speaking of time, we're out of time. In the meantime, look all this up yourself because it is all on this thing we call the internet.